Not until we are lost do we begin to understand ourselves. Henry David Thoreau.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the prologue season of the Seasons of Jason podcast. That sounds a little awkward. I'm going to have to work on this intro a bit. I'm recording this episode in a beautiful, quaint, charming little unincorporated community in Utah called Brookside. This property sits right along the Santa Clara River, and you might hear the occasional bird or chainsaw in the distance amidst the gurgling of the river. We're just going to roll with it because I love including these ambient nature sounds in the mix. It might not make for the cleanest sounding recording, but it's definitely an authentic one. So look, in this show that's mostly about hiking and adventuring, there's nothing in this episode that's actually about hiking and adventuring. But sometimes in order to understand a person and how they frame their experiences and interpret their experiences, you need to know their origin story. When was the kind of crucial beginning? When was this seed planted? Well, the beginning of this story starts in the year 1993. That sounds jarring, saying out loud, because it's more than 30 years ago. 32 years ago-ish. The story begins way before I stopped accepting the reality that was presented to me. Write that one down for the quiz at the end of this prologue season. No, I'm just kidding. But that is, I think, definitely going to be a theme going forward. I'm going to say it again. It happened before I stopped accepting the reality that was presented to me. The story begins before I was the guy who drove across the country to kickstart a global music podcasting network. That was Insomnia Radio back in the day. It starts before I was the guy cleaning Amtrak trains overnight. Before I spent a few months homeless. Before I was Jason, the Forbes tech journalist, or Jason, the Linux enthusiast, or the guy who sort of lost his way by diving headfirst into marketing work at AMD, or the guy who escaped to Croatia for 7 years. Before all of that, I was a seaman apprentice in the U.S. Navy. So, yeah, you could say I've had some spur trails in my life. After I wrapped up high school in 1993, my entire skill set amounted to knowing about 7 guitar chords, a few useless French phrases that I've completely forgotten, running a decent 800 meters in track and field, and writing acrimonious lyrics laced with self-loathing. I was an emo kid before emo was a thing, I think. So I adopted the ridiculously cliche, very premature stance of being completely uncertain what I could accomplish with my life, and I enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Didn't feel like I had any other options. It wasn't so much a decision I made after weeks of deliberate and logical and reasonable thought, as it was an impulsive action that guaranteed a paycheck for the next several years. My teenage brain thought it was necessary. So did my parents, who gave their consent since I wouldn't even turn 18 for another 5 months. Honestly, none of the military-driven career paths pitched to me by my recruiter sounded remotely interesting. Blinded by the promise of steady income and a huge enlistment bonus, I arbitrarily decided to become something called an electronic warfare technician. Now, what does an electronic warfare technician do? They operate high-tech systems that evaluate various electronic signals like radar emissions. And they track surface and airborne targets, and they sometimes work with classified materials in support of national security. They're one of many layers of technical maritime intelligence. Now, my recruiter tried to make this a little more enticing by framing this career as firing missiles at the enemy. That's kind of what it boiled down to. I'll never actually know what it felt like to perform these duties on a Navy carrier or a frigate or a destroyer, because after boot camp and about 5 months into my technical schooling at a base called NTTC Corey Station in Pensacola, Florida, I suffered a knee injury during morning PT. I was participating in a 5 a.m. pickup game of basketball because I think we had the option. Do you want to just run forever or do squats and sit-ups and stuff like that? Or do you want to play some basketball and get physical? I went up for a jump shot and I landed not correctly on some guy's foot. I felt my right leg bend in a way that seemed very awkward and just not right. And it was also very painful. The result was an ACL tear. Now, the ER doctor who was on duty gave me a pair of crutches, 6 weeks of light duty, which is reduced physical duty, a prescription for 800 milligrams of Motrin, and told me to carry on. In the 90s, the U.S. military operated within very black and white, cut and dry principles. Maybe it's still this way. Maybe it's not. I really don't know. After those 6 weeks had elapsed, I was expected to hang up my crutches and get back to work, which almost always consisted of running. And running was something I spent 3 years doing voluntarily as often as possible and very happily in high school. So this was hardly a form of punishment. But my knee was not healed. And after a quarter mile at a light jog, it gave out on me, resulting in excruciating pain. I think it made everything worse. At first, I politely requested to be excused from morning PT. Then I politely refused. Here's the thing about refusing to do anything in the military. It's considered disobeying standing or direct orders, and it is subject to something called NJP, which is non-judicial punishment. There's no listening to reason. There's no entertaining that the doctor who diagnosed you might be wrong. There is just, you're disobeying a direct order. Now, this is the same military where getting a sunburn is considered damaging government property. My protests, regardless of how persuasive I thought they were, fell on uninterested ears. Repeated x-rays indicated that my knee was fine. Discussion over. So, one morning, as I was mindlessly cleaning the quarterdeck, I overheard this discussion about a fellow EW, that's the electronic warfare tech, EW in training, who had threatened to kill himself. And it was this hushed conversation, and it sounded like he had been processed and dishonorably discharged within weeks of threatening this. Now, I wasn't suicidal, but I was desperate. And I was not in my right mind. Weeks of being stuck in this holding pattern without a resolution resulted in depression sticking its toxic hooks into me. My previously perfect record was now marred with instances of the NJP, the non-judicial punishment. Even if a doctor wouldn't tell me, I instinctively knew that my knee would never be the same. So a way out seemed impossible. But as the days dragged on, I started hearing more whispers of this concept known as suicidal ideation. These fragments of rumors and conversations eventually formed a semi-complete picture, and that picture led to a simple, kinda desperate plan. All I had to do was schedule a meeting with the base chaplain and explain that I had been constantly plagued by suicidal thoughts since joining the military, and that if I wasn't discharged immediately, I would have no choice but to end my life. Again, this was the early 90s, so, engaging in an internet fact-finding mission was difficult, if not impossible. You relied on what your friends heard from their friends. You relied on what your superiors conveyed directly to you. And sometimes you had no choice but to accept that as fact. During this whole process, I was told very plainly that due to the nature of my discharge, I would not be eligible for re-enlistment. I also wouldn't be eligible for any of the VA benefits like health insurance or disability payments. I was openly shamed for choosing this course of action, but simultaneously coddled and reassured that life was still worth living. Anyway, within 3 weeks, I was on a Greyhound bus back home to Central California as a civilian, back to a directionless life with no structure and full of anger at the military and full of contempt and guilt. It has taken me years to realize that I can be overly trusting. And at 19 years old, I accepted what my peers and superiors in Pensacola told me as fact. Free thinking had been gradually erased from my daily routine. I had no expectations of compensation from the VA after becoming a civilian, and so I didn't pursue it. At a certain age, we stop accepting the reality we're presented with. I had not reached that age yet, not even close. Worse still was what I had accepted about my body, that at 19, my knee would never be the same. I'd never sprint around a track again. Never go for an early morning jog along the shore at Morro Rock Beach. Never hold a job that involves standing all day long. Irrational as these beliefs were, I allowed them to be cemented as inescapable fact. They just permeated my being. And as the years passed by, their weight dissipated until finally they just integrated themselves into my daily life. They became reality. I accepted these things as truth, regarded them as normal, typical. I didn't question them. I settled instead. Now, please listen to me. I urge you to never settle, to never accept the reality that you are presented with if you did not participate in creating that reality. I'm going to say this again. Never accept the reality you're presented with if you did not participate in creating it. You need to carve your own trail. It wasn't until a staggering 17 years later that my wife at the time, a woman whose profession relied on exhaustive, detailed research, convinced me that everything I'd accepted about this entire situation was bullshit. I reluctantly called up my local Department of Veterans Affairs office and scheduled an appointment, now feeling like a complete outsider, like someone who had never trained to guide missiles to the enemy's doorstep, someone who still felt this degree of shame, a lot of shame really, for abandoning what he had signed up for. A series of interviews and examinations later led to some revelations that shocked me. It took many months, but the VA dug up my physical medical records from Corey Station, and they found something alarming. The same doctor I had initially seen following my knee injury had written something on my chart right below the Motrin prescription and light duty orders. It was right there in faded black ink. But it was there, legible enough that 4 little words knocked the wind out of me. Recommend for medical discharge. I never saw those words. No one ever spoke those words. No one ever presented that potential reality to me. And this was I think the only instance in my life where I had felt a uniquely valid, potent combination of rage, surprise, betrayal, and relief register in my brain all at once. When you spend 17 years 17 years, stubbornly and foolishly believing something is fact because you were gullible enough to take someone's word, it really fucks with you. So ultimately, the VA gave me a 40% disability rating, and 10% of that was attributed to my knee. The other 30%, mood disorders. Specifically, depression and anxiety, something I grapple with to this very day. Now, I want to talk a bit about depression here. What I'm going to say I feel is important, whether you suffer from depression or you care about someone who is suffering from depression. No one in their right mind would wake up in the morning and willfully refuse to enjoy this multitude of things throughout the course of any given day that makes us smile and appreciate life, that brings us joy. That first sip of a perfectly brewed French pressed cup of coffee, a good stretch, the loving licks from your goofy dogs, crisp and fluffy waffles drowning in real maple syrup, the invigorating steam from a hot shower, the opening notes of your favorite Pearl Jam song, the one where you swear your vocals can put Eddie Vedder to shame. No one believes you, though. But those of us suffering from depression are not in our right minds because everything feels wrong. And casually snapping out of it is as ludicrous a suggestion as just spontaneously taking flight. And the worst part about depression is that it paralyzes you. It always does it mentally and sometimes physically. Sure enough, I was always exhausted, and I had near constant aches and pains in my bad knee. At times, it progressed to such a point that standing up from a sitting position left me doubled over in pain after doing really nothing. Sometimes just walking around the block or even walking around my house was an exercise in frustration, painful frustration. My doctor at the time told me knee surgery was a realistic option, but one that I should reserve as a last resort. And I felt like I was way too young for last resorts. So that's the way back origin story. It's so strange to look back on that version of myself, someone who was always angry and ashamed and lost without any of the tools to navigate my way to some kind of peace and contentment. I guess that's because the trail I was, meant to explore in life hadn't even materialized yet. Hadn't even been built, or I just couldn't see it. I didn't have the knowledge or the tools or the experience, but I'm grateful for what happened back then. I really am. I'm grateful for it all. The knee injury, the messy ejection from the military, and even the years it took to even start realizing that I could reshape my reality. All of that informed who I am right at this moment. If one tiny thing had been different, who knows what this trail would have looked like? Coming up on the next episode, the first startling wake-up call that convinced me to actually start reshaping my reality, and the one that inspired me to start hiking. Thank you so much for listening to the Seasons of Jason podcast. I'll see you next week, and until then, take care, and take care of each other.